Trigger warning: past abuse, slight mention of self-harm. I am a 40-year-old man married to a 39-year-old woman who is the love of my life. We were high school best friends and started dating after college. During high school, I noticed that she had a bad home life. There was screaming almost every day, and it often left her in tears. Holidays were always ruined, with the police getting involved most times. On her 17th birthday, her stepdad and mom couldn't get along and he screamed at her for hours. My wife is small, only about 5'2" and 130 pounds, while her stepdad is a 6'5" and 220-pound religious fanatic and narcissist who thinks he's never in the wrong. He controlled every aspect of her life, even down to how much soap and milk she used. She had to endure his abuse until she turned 18 and then moved in with her biological dad. I would like to place all the blame on her stepdad, but her mom, who seems like a saint, is mentally ill. She has been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder and used to take medication when my wife was a baby, but stopped when she was a child. The emotional abuse my wife endured almost weekly breaks my heart. It also turned physical once when she was 17. She still has nightmares about it. Everything affected my wife so much that she began self-harming and now sees a therapist who diagnosed her with PTSD. She still doesn't enjoy celebrating her birthday or Christmas because of the extreme bad memories, but she does it for her children because she wants to be the parent she never had. Anyway, one Tuesday, our 16-year-old daughter wanted to spend the night at her grandparents', and we said no. She became upset, calling us controlling and claiming it's easier at her grandparents'. She yelled that she hated us and wished they were her parents. My wife suddenly became completely still. It's like that sentence broke her. I sent our daughter to her room while she was still throwing a fit, and my wife remained motionless. It was as if our daughter broke her spirit. I was very upset. We went to our room and my wife broke down in tears. It was the first time I had seen her cry like that since she still lived with her parents. It devastated me to see her so broken. I had an idea to let our daughter stay with her grandparents, even though we usually don't allow our kids to stay with them for more than a day. I shared my idea with my wife, and she freaked out initially. However, our daughter was not in any real danger. My wife's brother was visiting and staying with them, so I asked him to look out for her. He agreed, and because of his presence, my wife reluctantly agreed as well. Our daughter managed to last 3 days before calling me in tears. I picked her up, and she cried in my arms after her grandpa yelled at her over something. While I comforted her, I explained that we have rules for specific reasons. There's a reason she wasn't allowed to sleep over. Although her grandparents may seem fun for a short period, my wife had to deal with them her entire life. The reality is that our daughter didn't witness anything compared to her mom's childhood. Some may think I am a jerk, but I genuinely saw regret on my daughter's face. We went home, and she immediately went to my wife, and they embraced tightly. My daughter apologized and expressed her love for her mom. Later, I told my parents about the incident, and they called me a jerk for what I did. However, things worked out in the end. So am I the jerk? Edit. I just got off work, and now I can answer some questions. Why are they still in your lives? They weren't in our lives for the longest time. However, my wife's mother got diagnosed with cancer. She begged my wife for a chance to know her grandchildren, and my wife agreed under the condition that they were never left alone with her parents. Despite everything, my wife still loves her mom very much. As for her stepdad, he must always be accompanied by his wife. He never leaves her side. After her mother beat cancer, we allowed visits to continue as long as they behaved. And they did. This incident with our daughter is the only one she witnessed. To the comment about my wife's brother not protecting her, remember that when she was younger, he was just a scrawny 14-year-old kid who couldn't do much. He has since expressed regret about it. Regarding not telling our daughter more about her mom's past, it's very difficult for my wife to talk about it. We did inform all our children that their mom had a difficult childhood and her parents were bad people, which is why we don't see them often. While some may think it's not enough of an explanation, our other 2 children, a 17-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter, understood perfectly that their grandparents weren't good people. We also told our daughter she could call whenever she wanted. She wanted to go, so we let her, and she faced the consequences. Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Why didn't you tell her? Why did you let her meet her grandparents at all? Also, why was she acting like you were starving her? What was the rule she thought was too controlling? Please tell me it wasn't food restrictions. Comment 2. I will never understand why adult children of abusers turn around and serve up their own children to their abusers. Your kids should never have met your wife's parents, not even for 5 minutes one time. Now for the update. Hey Reddit, it's been 2 weeks since I last posted about the situation with my daughter wanting to stay with her grandparents. And boy, do I have an update for you all. After the whole ordeal, things were tense at home. My wife was still shaken up, and our daughter was quiet, probably processing everything that had happened. But then something unexpected occurred. My wife's brother, who had been staying with her parents, decided to have a long overdue confrontation with their stepdad. He called us one evening, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and relief. He had stood up to the man who had made their lives miserable for years. He told him off for all the pain he caused, especially to my wife. It was a jaw-dropping moment for us to hear about because he had always been the quiet type, avoiding conflict. But seeing his niece upset seemed to have lit a fire in him. This confrontation led to a huge argument at their house, and my wife's mom finally saw her husband's true colors. She had been in denial for so long, but she couldn't ignore it anymore. She kicked him out. Yes, you read that right. After years of his control and abuse, he was finally out of the house. My wife was stunned when she heard the news. It was like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She had always worried about her mom, even after everything, and now her mom was free from that man's grip. Meanwhile, our daughter was doing her own soul-searching. She came to us one night, tears in her eyes, and asked if she could know more about her mom's past. She said she wanted to understand better and that she was sorry for not believing us before. So my wife and I sat down with her and shared some of the less traumatic stories of her childhood. We explained why we were so protective and why we had rules. Our daughter listened, hugging her mom tightly, and promised to be more understanding. Our other 2 kids, who had been a bit distant during this time, came around too. They had been confused about the sudden change in the house's atmosphere, but seeing their sister and mom bonding, they joined in. It was like our family was healing together. The best part, my wife started to smile more. She was laughing again, and it was like the dark cloud that had been hanging over her had dissipated. She even started planning a small birthday celebration for herself, something she hadn't done in years. It was a simple dinner with just us and the kids, but it meant the world to her. As for my parents, who had called me a jerk, they came around too. They saw the change in my wife and how our family was coming together. They apologized for judging me and offered their support. And the cherry on top, my wife's mom, now living alone, started therapy. She wanted to work on herself and make up for lost time with her daughter and grandchildren. She even joined us for the birthday dinner, and it was the first time in a long time that I saw genuine happiness in her eyes. I backed the teacher's punishments until a tantrum exposed her scandalous secret. Now the whole school's in chaos, and she's on leave. My daughter is in 3rd grade. She is a really good kid, but happens to be in a really rough class with a ton of behavior issues and disrespect. I have a very favorable impression of her teacher, and she appears to have good management skills. It just seems to be a bad group. On Friday, the 12th, a few weeks ago, the Friday before Martin Luther King Day and the 3-day weekend, my daughter's teacher tried to read the class a story about the life of MLK on the carpet at the very end of the day. Just after school ended that day, she made a very long and unhappy post on the platform teachers use to communicate with parents at our school. She said the class's behavior she experienced while trying to read the story was by far the worst behavior she has ever encountered in over a decade of teaching. She went on about how unbelievably disrespectful, rude, disinterested, and off-task the students were. She said she had to send multiple people to the office, that she had to stop the story midway through since the kids were being so rude and have everyone put their heads down at their desks with the lights off. Lots of kids still continued to make noise, giggle, whisper, and she had to call a staff member from the office to come to the classroom. I asked my daughter about it, and she gave additional details. One boy got sent to the office for making a very disrespectful joke about MLK's death. Another boy got sent because he got up and did a weird dance while she was reading and wouldn't stop. And another boy got sent outside for blowing into his elbow and making a huge fart sound. She said she didn't act up, which her teacher confirmed when my wife talked to her, but that most other kids were talking, making noise, and being rude as well. The following week, her teacher announced some whole class consequences. 1. The whole class spent both their recesses on the wall the Tuesday they returned. The 3 boys I talked about earlier were on a whole week. 2. They had extra homework assignments each night that week on MLK that added about 15 extra minutes of homework per night. 3. The class Valentine's Day party, where the kids design Valentine boxes and have a party exchanging gifts, eating candy, and listening to music, is canceled. She said during the time when the other classes have their party, they'll be having a social studies test. My daughter was really upset about the party being canceled and has been complaining that it's unfair because she didn't act up. My wife agrees, and these past couple of weeks have been complaining a lot about her teacher, which I'd never heard her do previously. Yesterday, she said something about wanting to complain to the principal, and I told her she sounded like a Karen. I said I applaud her teacher for not taking crap and giving the kids some real consequences, and said life isn't always fair. Deal with it. This made her mad. Am I the idiot? Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. You're the idiot. This type of punishment breeds resentment. I always hated this when I was a kid. Why behave if I'm going to get punished either way? This is the lazy way out. If this teacher can't control her students, then administration needs to step in. Homework should not be used as a punishment. Your wife advocating for her child that has been wrongfully punished is not being a Karen. Then you're going to wonder why your daughter doesn't like school. Who wants to go somewhere where they are punished for being good? Comment 2. Teacher here. You're the idiot. Your daughter's teacher's punishments are over the top and worse, ineffective for the following reasons. 1. Punishing kids who didn't engage in the bad behavior. 2. The time gap between the bad behavior and the punishment is not logical. If that matches her regular discipline, then it's not surprising she's having trouble with the class. If you punish kids even when they don't misbehave, then why would they behave? Now for the update. Hey everyone, a lot has happened since my last post about my daughter's 3rd grade class and their behavior issues. I thought I'd give you all an update on the situation, which has taken some pretty unexpected turns. After the whole mess with the class being unable to behave during the MLK story reading, things seemed to calm down a bit. The teacher, Mrs. Jensen, who's been teaching for over a decade and has always had a handle on her classes, was visibly shaken by the incident. It was a side of her I hadn't seen before. She's the kind of teacher who knows every trick in the book to keep kids engaged, but this class was proving to be her toughest challenge yet. The following week, when the whole class was put on the wall during recess, it was clear that Mrs. Jensen was serious about discipline. The 3 boys who had been the most disruptive were on thin ice, and the extra homework seemed to be a wake-up call for some of the students. But not all of them took it seriously. Whispers and giggles could still be heard during the silent homework sessions. My daughter, who's always been a good kid, was still upset about the Valentine's Day party being canceled. She felt it was unfair to punish everyone for the actions of a few. My wife, who had always been supportive of Mrs. Jensen, started to sour on her. She thought the collective punishment wasn't the right approach and began voicing her concerns more and more, even considering talking to the principal about it. I was caught in the middle, trying to support both my wife and my daughter, while also understanding the tough position Mrs. Jensen was in. I remembered how Mrs. Jensen had once told me about her early years of teaching, how she had learned that sometimes you have to be strict to maintain order, It seemed like she was drawing on that experience now. But then things took a turn. One of the boys who had been sent to the office, let's call him Jake, had a history of acting out. His parents were going through a tough divorce, and it was clear that the situation at home was affecting his behavior at school. Mrs. Jensen had been working with him one-on-one, trying to help him channel his energy into his schoolwork instead of disruptions. This past week, Jake had another outburst. He threw a tantrum during a math lesson, knocking over chairs and yelling. Mrs. Jensen, who had been patient with him up to this point, finally snapped. She yelled back at him, something none of us thought we'd ever see from her. The class went silent, shocked at the confrontation. Jake stormed out of the classroom, and Mrs. Jensen followed him out, leaving the class unsupervised. It was during this unsupervised time that another student, Sarah, who had been one of the quieter ones, found Mrs. Jensen's phone on her desk. She started scrolling through it, and what she found was shocking. There were messages between Mrs. Jensen and another teacher, Mr. Davis, that were, let's just say, not appropriate for school. Sarah showed the messages to a few other students, and before long, the whole class knew about the secret relationship between Mrs. Jensen and Mr. Davis. When Mrs. Jensen came back to the classroom, she realized her phone was missing and immediately knew something was wrong. The news of the relationship spread like wildfire. Parents were calling each other, students were gossiping, and the principal was brought into the loop. Mrs. Jensen was mortified, and Mr. Davis was nowhere to be found. The school was in an uproar, and my wife, who had been ready to complain to the principal about the Valentine's Day party, was now more concerned about the scandal unfolding before us. As for my daughter, she came home that day with a mix of emotions. She was confused about what was happening with her teacher and worried about what it meant for the rest of the school year. And just when we thought things couldn't get any more chaotic, the principal announced that Mrs. Jensen would be taking a leave of absence, effective immediately. My coworker mocks my husband's homemade pasta, so I invite him over again, and he's forced to admit a hilarious truth. Oh boy, the tables turn. Me, 36 years old female, and my husband Kyle, 38 years old male, have recently moved, and last week we had a former coworker, Butters, over for lunch. Butters is traveling here for work and had asked if another coworker, Cartman, could also come over because he was alone at the hotel. We didn't mind. We love entertaining. We didn't know Cartman, but Butters said he was a great guy and stuff. Kyle enjoys making bread and pasta, so he decided he was making fettuccine for lunch with bolognese sauce. When I say make fettuccine, I mean making the pasta itself. When Butters and Cartman arrived, Kyle was in the process of making the pasta, using his hands and countertop, which we thoroughly cleaned beforehand. This was part of the plan, so we had plenty of snacks. They were having beer, snacks, talking, and I was preparing the sauce. I noticed that Cartman was eating a lot of snacks and thought to myself, how can this guy still have space for the pasta? He's not big. But shrugged it off. Time to eat. We're all at the table. And then Cartman says he's not having the fettuccine. We were surprised and asking why and stuff, and he excused himself saying he was full from having too many snacks. So we said, you don't have to eat that much, just try a little yada yada. And then he proceeded to say in a very subtle way that he was not actually comfortable with the hand and countertop use while making it. In other words, he was grossed out by the process of making it. I was honestly taken aback and kind of mad at him. It was really awkward for everyone, and Kyle and Butters tried to say something else and make it seem like it was not a big deal. Cartman said that if we had regular store-bought pasta, he could have some. I was pissed, and although I had some store-bought fettuccine and could have prepared it for him, I said, I'm sorry, but I don't really have anything else to serve. If you had said something before, I could have made something. I only have some cheese and bread. To my surprise, he said he would have that. So my question is, am I the idiot for not cooking the store-bought pasta for him, even though I had some at home? At the moment, I was pissed at him, but now I think maybe I was petty. Edit 1, guys. Not going against the YTA comments, just to give some background. I guess this thing about insisting on giving him some food might be a cultural thing. In our country, this is very common, especially with us Italian descendants. But all of us did it, but in a friendly way, because we were shocked that he didn't want the pasta because, I'm sorry, but it looked really good. But I understand that we shouldn't have done it, and it was definitely a lesson. I guess he's just too used to seeing industrialized food and was like, one does not simply make their own pasta. Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. No idiots here. It was not rude of you not to make him something else, but I hope you recognize that he wasn't expecting you to make him anything else. He was trying to be as little trouble as possible. Most people I know would have considered it to be incredibly rude for him to say something when he saw the pasta being made. Your house, your food prep. Guests keep their mouths shut and either eat it or pretend to be full. That's the polite thing to do where I'm from. Comment 2. You're the idiot for pressuring him to give an answer about what he is or isn't eating and why. Never do that. People can eat or not eat what they want, and it's rude to pressure people to eat things after they've said no. Not the idiot for not cooking a second meal, but next time just don't try to pressure people after they've said no. Now, for the update. Hey everyone, thanks for all the advice and comments on my last post. I've got quite the update for you all. So, after the awkward lunch with Butters and Cartman, things took an unexpected turn. Kyle, who's always been the peacekeeper, suggested we invite them over again to clear the air. I wasn't thrilled, but I agreed. Butters was all for it, but Cartman hesitated. He eventually agreed, saying he'd bring a dish as a peace offering. The day arrived, and Butters showed up first with his famous homemade tiramisu. It was a hit last time he brought it to a work potluck, and Kyle had been raving about it ever since. Cartman walked in a bit later with a store-bought salad. It was a bit underwhelming, but we appreciated the gesture. As we sat down to eat, the tension was thick. Kyle had outdone himself with a homemade pizza this time, and the aroma was mouth-watering. Cartman complimented the smell, but then dropped a bombshell. He was on a new diet and couldn't eat pizza. Butters rolled his eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck that way. We all tried to keep the conversation light, but Cartman kept making passive-aggressive comments about real food versus processed junk. Kyle, bless his heart, tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but Cartman was like a dog with a bone. Then, the moment that left us all speechless. Cartman admitted he had lied about being full the last time. He said he just didn't trust homemade pasta. Butters, who had been quiet until then, suddenly burst out laughing. He revealed that Cartman had once tried to make pasta himself and ended up with a kitchen disaster. It turned out Cartman was just projecting his own insecurities onto Kyle's cooking. The room went silent. Kyle's face was a mix of shock and amusement. I couldn't believe Cartman had caused such a scene over his own failed cooking attempt. Butters was still chuckling, shaking his head at the absurdity of it all. As we finished our meal, Cartman seemed to shrink into his chair, realizing he had made a fool of himself. Butters, who had always been the life of the party, kept the mood light with jokes and stories from work. It was clear he was trying to make up for Cartman's behavior. The next day, Kyle received a text from Cartman. It was an apology of sorts. He admitted he had been out of line and that he was dealing with some personal issues that made him act out. Kyle, ever the forgiving soul, accepted the apology but made it clear that respect in our home was non-negotiable. Butters, on the other hand, had a different way of handling things. He had taken a video of Cartman's kitchen disaster and had been holding on to it for the right moment. With Cartman's permission, he shared it with us. It was a hilarious sight. Flour everywhere, dough stuck to the ceiling, and a very flustered Cartman in the middle of it all. In the end, justice was served in the most subtle of ways. Cartman's own past came back to humble him, and he learned a valuable lesson about judging others. Kyle and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, knowing that Cartman would think twice before criticizing someone else's cooking. And as for Butters, he's been over a few more times since then, always with a new dessert to share. Kyle and I have grown to appreciate his lighthearted approach to life and his ability to diffuse tense situations with humor. If you like this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day.